Just because you have an understanding of the Bible in your head doesn't necessarily mean that you have Jesus in your heart.
Get right, get inside, get hungry, got appetite. Everlasting water, never again thirsty. To disputed lands, take a journey.
You are listening to Chad Schaefer on Disputed Lands.
You're getting another one this week. Hey everybody, it's Monday night. You know what that means. It's time for Disputed Lands. As always, I'm very happy to see you guys here on Disputed Lands. Just a couple of things to announce here to get out of the way before I bring on my guest. The logo contest is officially cut off from submissions. I just got through uploading the last of the submissions I had for the logo contest to the Disputed Lands Facebook page. That means here within the next week, I'll try to figure out a way to identify them. And I still got to figure out a voting process. I said I might just have everybody vote, but what I might do is I might go the route where I'll have on all the NYSTV guests here at the beginning of one of the Disputed Lands. And we'll each go through them and rate them ourselves, and we'll just do that as a live show. I'm leaning that way just simply because it's going to be easier for me to tell you the truth, rather than going through and compiling and trying to keep track and all that. So there's a lot of good submissions. I really thank you guys for putting the time and the effort. Seeing you guys send them in meant a lot to me, and seeing how many of you were interested in doing that was just really cool. So without much further ado, I'm going to bring on my guest, John Holler. Like you said in this post, in the post on Facebook, if you caught that there, John Holler is an attorney. He's out of Columbus, Ohio. He is a pastor teacher at FBC Chapel, which is a Fellowship Bible Chapel there in Columbus, where he's been there for a number of years. It's just a small church. But what John is most known for is his weekly prophecy updates. He has thousands and thousands of viewers on YouTube. He's been doing this week. John can probably correct me, but he's been doing this for over a decade, maybe even 2 decades now. And I think he's only missed maybe 2 or 3 weeks in that time frame where he's not done an update. Is that about right, John? That sound right?
Well, I think I've missed one Sunday and about maybe 2 Sundays in the last 3 years.
It's an incredible amount.
I was teaching a class at a large church here in Columbus, and so I used to do it each week. Excuse me. And I taught a class, and everybody would say, well, gee, if we miss, we don't get to keep up, and how do we keep up? And so for years, we really struggled with how do we get people informed? How do we keep things going? And so I just, about 5 years ago, I guess it was, in early 2013, we figured out how to put them up on YouTube, and just by accident figured out how to get around the 12 or 15 minute time limit that they used to have. And it just kind of took off. So we really put up some people in the class, and then we started a church in the middle of 2013, Fellowship Bible Chapel. And once we did that, it just kind of took off and grew. I mean, I think the first year we had 17,000 views on our YouTube channel for the whole year. And then, went up to a couple 100,000, then about 1.1 million, now about 2.5 million. And frankly, we don't even really keep track anymore, but it's funny because the social media thing is it's kind of interesting. I was in court, I was in bankruptcy court in another city, and one of the ladies there came up and said, "Oh, I watch you on YouTube," and
right. And we're going to get into that social media conversation here in a little bit. I've known John for probably 3 years now through Doug Krieger. Doug Krieger introduced John and I through a little group we had again on social media. So I talked with him for a long time. I got a little story to tell here real quick before we get into the conversation. Is that John and I got to meet in person for the first time last year at the Denver Prophecy Summit and hosted by Doug Hamp. And John and I rode together, and you can't see this really on the YouTube videos that he does every week, but this man has a wingspan that is ginormous. He could touch either wall in this office. And he was talking, and John doesn't know, he, in his own words, he doesn't know he's a big guy. He thinks he's a little guy. And he was waving to people out my window, but he would move his hands, and I kept having to go like this because he'd be so emotional. He'd get really into what he was saying, and his hand would come across. I swear he could wave at people out of my window on my side of the car. So it's just real fun riding with him. But
I'm going to a conference this weekend. I'm afraid to run into the Nephilim guys because they might try to tie me down, and
they might tie you down or try to take off your head.
Yeah.
So, just stay away from the guy named David, okay?
Yeah, well, L.A. Marzulli's going to be there too, so I've already told some, keep him away. Just tell him I'm not a Nephilim. I'm really not. I'm just a normal guy. So,
well, the reason we brought you on tonight is because John, and my audience knows this. I do from time to time do a weekly where I'll just do a news show on here, and I haven't done that since my co-host Troy stepped aside. I haven't really done a news and update, but I really have a hard time stomaching really reading through news because I see the junk, and it just makes my blood pressure go up. It gets me really hot and mad, and it just puts me in an irritable mood. So John has a gift. John has a special gift. As a lawyer, it's understandable. He just has a real gift to be able to sift through that stuff. And though he's emotionally affected, he can keep going, whereas I have to quit. He's got this amazing ability to keep going. And I watch John every week. He puts out his update every Sunday. You can usually find it in the afternoon. It'll show up on Facebook or Twitter, so you can follow him. But he has a real neat ability to hone in on the important articles that are placed out there. And he'll also break down for you so you don't necessarily have to read through the whole thing and find the quotes from those socialist, leftist crazies that are out there, and show us where they're leading, the direction they're going. And it's so beneficial to me. He usually about an hour is all they are, and he relates those to the scriptures and what we can expect and where we might be on this timeline of the return of our Father. So with that being said, I talked to John earlier today, and I asked him to we're going to go back in time a little bit and talk about this the Kavenaugh thing from start to where we are today, and some important news that maybe some other people might have missed about Kavenaugh already. So John, if you would just kind of break down from start to finish what the Kavenaugh issue from start to finish and what we saw in the media surrounding that.
Well, maybe the starting point should go back to 1973. Now, I know we don't have all day and all night to talk about this, but the Roe versus Wade decision was a real game changer. Not too long after that case was decided, 1977, I started law school at Indiana University there in Indianapolis. And one of the classes you take your first year is constitutional law. And my professor, who is a liberal, what I would call a classic liberal, sort of an Alan Dershowitz type, talked about Roe versus Wade and how significant it was in that it wasn't really that the decision was not really grounded in anything. In fact, in the decision, the majority said that they found the right for this abortion. It was based on the right of privacy. There had been a few cases leading up to that. and that they found it in the penumbra, in the shadows of the constitutional language. So, and that decision really led to a great cultural divide in America over the right to abortion. And so here we are 45 years later, we're still fighting about that. It's still considered to be one of the predominant issues. And it's really it's one of the factors that's led to a great, I think, increase in what I would call the left-right divide. And I would exclude from the left, I would exclude classic liberals, people that are about privacy and freedom of speech and that sort of thing with the left. And this is something that's been been building for a long time. I went to a Christian college. I graduated in 1976, and I went to Indiana State University to work on a master's in criminology. So I get down to Terre Haute, and the guy in the office next to me is a pot-smoking socialist criminology professor. And he used to make me read these books. I remember one of the books was by a guy named Quinney, Critique of Legal Order. And it was just pure Marxism. It was, it was a critique of, it was race theory, all this nonsense that Marxism wraps up in it. And I told him, I said, listen, I'm going to give you the answers that you want because I want my A, but don't make me read that junk anymore. Or if you're going to make me read that junk, then you have to read some junk that I'm going to give you. And
Right.
So he never made me read that anymore, but he was in the office next door. And I was sort of, even back in 1976, I was sort of viewed as this kind of crazy conservative on campus among the graduate assistants there. In the criminology department, where you would expect to be that there would be a lot of conservatives, but the students, the students even then were very liberal in their leftist in their viewpoint, and it was kind of an eye opener to me because I'd gone to a fairly conservative Christian college, and I just had not really had that much experience with it. And I learned pretty soon that for years people had been indoctrinated in this ideology, first at the university level, and so over the last 45 years, this thing has seeped down into grade, high school, middle school, elementary school, and whatnot. And so now we have a generation of kids who've been sort of steeped in this ideology, whether they realize it or not. And we have a massive problem in the United States.
Yeah. So, like I said, I have a hard time for any length of time being able to keep my attention on it. So I knew this Kavenaugh was nominated for the Supreme Court bench, and when that hit, we saw a whole slew of things of just smear begin. So why has the Supreme Court bench, I'm not even really sure I know how to put this. How has it been allowed to become, or why has it become such a hot button issue when the judges are supposed to be neutral?
Well, neutrality is often, it's kind of a myth. I mean, we all come to any situation with our biases and prejudices.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the advantages being a lawyer is I have to read a lot of stuff I don't agree with. Like if I'm working on a case, it's the way our system works. We have a system of advocacy where two sides go in and they tell their story, they present their evidence, and then somebody, a judge or a jury, decides who's right. So everybody approaches it with bias. I will say, and I've mentioned this a number of times in my updates, that I don't remember when the shift happened exactly. I started talking and doing some public speaking on the effects of postmodernism, everything based on feelings, back in the early 2000s. It was sometime in the 90s that they changed lawyer education to be a trial lawyer. They used to tell you how to effectively present evidence and facts. And at some point, Chad, it changed to where you were told not so much how you presented things, but how to tell a story and appeal to people's emotions. And so this is in the law, this is in the courtroom. And so now we have, people aren't really that concerned with the facts. So the whole society has been kind of wrapped up in this. It's a huge, complicated issue, but we've reached this point where feelings govern everything. And so in constitutional law, where in things would come to the Supreme Court for decision, the Supreme Court has also adopted that philosophy. Now, there are judicial conservatives that would look at the original intent and language of the Constitution, but you have leftists like people like Ginsburg and Sotomayor and Kagan on the court that would be that have this view that the Constitution is what they call a living, breathing document, which essentially means, well, we can make it mean whatever we want it to mean. And so it was a shift in the way that people look at the Constitution, they look at the law, they look at the facts, they look at the evidence. And so there's this battle, and it's become a very stark divide, a very rigid ideological battle. And the Supreme Court they've gone into areas that they shouldn't have gone into. Roe versus Wade, the right to an abortion, should have been a political decision. But some people, they thought they could do better. They thought they could read it into the Constitution. They could rewrite the Constitution to allow it. And this is part of what we have in this problem. So the court's been very divided for a number of years. Presidents get the right to appoint Supreme Court justices, and they're appointed for life. You can't get rid of these guys. As much as the Democrats now, and they make these claims that, just wait till we get control of Congress or the Senate. Well, they'd have to get control of Congress first to impeach, to bring Kavenaugh or somebody else up on charges. And they'll say, well, we're going to impeach him, and then it will go to a trial in the Senate. But he's never going to be removed from office because they're not going to get 2/3 of the votes to remove him from office. They might, but they can make his life literally a living hell. So the court's really divided. It's essentially been, for a number of years now, 4-4 with a swing vote in the middle. That middle seat, that swing vote, has been occupied by Anthony Kennedy. Kennedy's retiring. Kennedy was appointed by, I think, either Reagan or Bush. He's been he was appointed to be a constitutional conservative, but you don't know how these guys are going to work out. And he's changed, and he's become sort of conservative on some issues and very liberal on others. He was the one who wrote the decision that struck down the sodomy laws in Texas a few years ago, the Lawrence case. He was the one who was the swing vote on the same-sex marriage decision, Obergefell, 3 years ago, case that actually came out of Ohio originally. So because he's retiring, everybody kind of liked Kennedy because he might vote with us sometimes, and we could sort of tolerate the times he didn't vote with us, even though these were really big issues. But now Trump is there. Trump gets to appoint someone, and he's looking for a constitutional conservative, a constitutional originalist, like Kavenaugh seems to be for the most part.
So we have so they're really up in arms. So we got Kavenaugh replacing Roberts, and then you're saying now that
he's replacing Kennedy.
Oh, he's replacing Kennedy,
right? So, Anthony Kennedy.
Okay, so are there expected to be anybody else likely to be stepping down in the near future? Because I thought I heard rumors that there was just one, but possibly two. Is that correct?
Well, you're appointed for life.
Right.
Ginsburg is, I'm not sure, the joke about Ginsburg is, she was appointed by Lincoln. She's approaching 90. I swear they're keeping her. They have some cryogenic chamber in the back room that kind of keeps her alive. And if we could ever cut off her cryogenic supply, maybe we would have another seat open on the court. So she claims she's going to stick. She wants to stick around until there's a left-leaning president to appoint a replacement for her. She knows that it's important. And let me tell you, if you thought the fight over Kavenaugh was bad, just wait till a Ginsburg retires and it's a president like Trump who gets to replace, like a Trump or a Pence that gets to choose her replacement. All hell's going to break loose. This is just a lead in to what you'll see in the future.
Yeah. So that I have two things. The two things the other thing that we talk about is that Sotomayor and Ginsburg both were, I think, at Princeton here. I saw an article last week, and they were talking about this neutrality thing. And I think you saw the article. It might have been you who talked about it or posted it. Talk about that a little bit, if you would. What I saw was them saying, they were basically, to boil it down, they were saying, oh, with Kavenaugh coming in, they were talking about Kennedy, we're going to lose that appearance of neutrality. But they're talking at Princeton. I mean, and they're doing the very thing as they're saying what they were speaking about. So
right, that's what you have to learn. There's certain rules when people on the left are talking, is that if they're criticizing the right, they're merely projecting the way they are. They'll criticize the right for being biased, but that means what they're really telling you is that they're biased more than anybody else.
You know, I'm not opposed to free speech. In my mind, there's nothing wrong with any one of those judges wanting to, if they wanted to say something and somebody wanted to hold a press conference and say what they want. How is it, though, that they could be invited to universities? Are those paid or not? Are they paid to come and speak?
Very often they will get a speaker fee to come and speak.
See, to me, that is just totally.
But Chief Justice Roberts will go places. Scalia before he died. However, whether you think he died of natural causes or there's a lot
highly suspicious.
There's a lot of different theories about that, but he would go and speak. He wrote a book. I think Clarence Thomas has written a book. He goes and speaks. I mean, there are certain ethical rules that they have to follow. But
they must be very loose, because it doesn't appear.
They're on the Supreme Court, so if they're going to be the ultimate arbiter of what the ethical rules are, then can I give you an example?
Please.
I had a case I filed in a federal court, and the next day it involved I'm not sure how detailed I should go into this, but it involved a medical malpractice case, and I was bringing an action against the doctor because he had lied on his insurance application. I represented the liability carrier. And the first thing, it was a very bad medical malpractice case. It was on an order of magnitude of this limousine crash in terms of the potential damages. It was just absolutely horrific. And about 2 days after I filed it, the judge calls and says, I want to have a status conference. And he gets the lawyer for the doctor on, but then he goes and gets the plaintiff's lawyer from the state court medical malpractice case and asks them what they think of my case. And he was hammering me pretty hard. The next day, this federal judge, has a lifetime appointment. I get a phone call, and it's the judge. And the judge goes, Mr. Haller, I don't think you understood what I was trying to tell you yesterday. I see you haven't dismissed your case yet. You don't want to try this case in front of me because you're going to lose. And I mean, I'm talking about potential damages of in excess of $20 million. And he said, if you don't think that, and he says, listen, you can appeal it, but I guarantee you're not going to win this case in front of me. And you should dismiss it, and you can appeal it, but I'll bet you'll lose. Now, this was, I think, highly unethical.
You think?
And I mean, my heart was literally beating out of my massive chest. And
it's times like that. You just wish.
I called my managing partner and I said, what do I do? And he goes, he has a lifetime appointment. Who do you go to complain to about a federal judge? Look, there have been about three federal judges impeached in the history of the United States in 230 years.
It's times like those that just makes you wish you had an all the time recording of your conversations going.
Well, and yeah, and it would be my word against his. So they're going to believe, some
Right.
lawyer from
Right.
Columbus over a federal judge.
Right.
And it was highly inappropriate. I dismissed the case that afternoon and refiled it in state court. So I mean, my client was protected, but good grief. I mean, so while there are ethical rules, in the federal system, the judges will push you to settle and resolve cases if they think they should be resolved. And I've had this happen. I've had judges that I clerked for in law school. They were my friend, and they dropped the hammer on me one time, moved a trial from one date to a date like the day after a holiday to force a settlement. And it happens. It's, they decide what they want or the way they want to decide the case. And it's a problem. I mean, the system's not perfect. It's pretty good, but now that we're running everybody on their emotions rather than facts in a large number of cases, it's very, very. Look, I'm glad I'm near retirement age. That's all.
Well, you were talking about you're in 76. I was born in 73, John. So I was only 3 years old when you were going to school.
Thanks for pointing that out.
So, but even at my age, which I like to think I'm young, but I was just thinking the other day, I'm 15 years away from 60, so I'm not as young as I like to think I am anymore. So, but even at my age, I have never seen the hysteria, politically speaking. I don't know if it's due to social media and the ability to get news, and because there are more people who have voices now, and there's a lot more outlets on the public airwaves. But it seems like the insanity was ratcheted up to a whole new level. Is that just me because I can't tolerate it, or is there something to that?
No, I mean, it really is that bad. I mean, I think today I saw that one of the senators somebody had sent him a picture of a beheading. One of the U.S. senators on the Republican side. I've heard of other threats that have been made. I've heard of direct threats made against. We're going to come after you, Justice Kavenaugh. And part of this is the educational system that we've let our kids go through all these years. I mean, I tell people, if you're a Christian, and there's any way you can do it, you need to get your kids out of public school. And I think you would not believe, Chad, the stuff that I get from teachers all over the United States and all over the world that they're having to teach. It's like on this transgender thing in grade school. It's utter insanity. And so then you layer on top of that decades of that kind of an educational system that's educated people, and then you layer on top of it things like rules for radicals, Alinsky's rules. All of this stuff is right out of the Alinsky playbook. And then you have some left-wing money that funds this stuff. I'll give you an example. I just posted this on my Facebook page. The abortionist in Philadelphia that they convicted of murder,
Ginsburg
or
Gosnell. Yeah.
There's a guy that's made. I can't remember his name. I think he's Scottish or English. He's made some conservative movies, and he's made a movie. It's called Gosnell. It opens Friday. He's tried to advertise that on Facebook, and Facebook has rejected the ads. The guy went to trial. He was convicted of murder. He's probably the biggest serial murderer in the history of the United States. And Facebook won't let a guy run ads about a movie about him because of its orientation, because it could be considered to be anti-abortion. And you better believe it. It's probably anti-abortion because it's telling the truth about at least one guy wrapped up in that practice. So I don't know what the answer is. I just think, somebody accused me of being a negative Nelly yesterday in one of the comments I got on my video. And I'm like, I'm a realist. I look and I see where things are going. And I think we've really gone past the tipping point. Now, which way are we going to go?
Well, that you're hitting right on my thoughts on that, because look, I was thinking about the positive and negatives of what has taken place since Trump. If you take away all the static and the noise of those things that have been accomplished, but you compare it to the hysteria that we've now had to listen to for 2 years every day, it seems like, well, are things getting worse or are they getting better? So I looked at numbers, and specifically, I looked at one number in particular because this is something that I am very passionate about, as many other people who call themselves Christian or believers, and that is pedophilia. You see what is happening society-wise, and the normalization of this kind of thing. Heck, for heaven's sake, we got an outspoken pedophilia running for Congress, of all things, and he's outspoken about it. But the arrest, I looked at the hard numbers in the last 2 years. If you look at this, John, and I don't know if you've seen it, the arrest of those who have been arrested for that crime have risen like 75% since. I mean, if you look at like the previous 8 years and the last 2 years, it's like 75% of the rest. And you see some of the things that don't make the news because they're not going to, but you see the Trump administration acting on some of these things that folks like yourself and myself would say, yes, this is something that is way past due, something that needs to be addressed, and something needs to be happened. So I'm encouraged by those things, but there are other things that just seems like, so I don't really know what to think. I find myself going, are we getting crazier? Is it going down the tubes? Am I seeing the society breakdown happen right in front of me? Or is it just normal and things are not as what they appear to be or made out to be?
Well, you live in Indiana, and you forgot I was actually at your house once when
Dean, that's right.
And I actually foreclosed on a golf course just down the road for you a number of years ago. So I do think it is that bad. I mean, and this is what I talk about. I mean, I think this is prophesied. Look, I just opened it up. It actually happened to be up on my iPad. So, and
go ahead.
The King James only people out there, please forgive me. It's open to the New American Standard. So forgive me, for reading from this. 2 Timothy chapter 3. But realize this, that in the last days, difficult times will come. For men will be, and then here's the description. So does this sound like people involved on the public stage today? Will be lovers of self, lovers of money, boastful, arrogant, revilers, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, unholy, unloving, irreconcilable, malicious gossips, without self-control, brutal, haters of good, treacherous, reckless, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, holding to a form of godliness, although they have denied its power. Avoid such men as these, Paul says. So look, I reference these verses all the time. I mean, this is what the Bible said it would be like. Jesus himself said that in the end times it would be like the days of Noah, and it would be like the days of Lot. So go read the story of Lot and Sodom and see what was going on there. And I've said this a number of times, especially with this transgender thing that we see coming on the scene here. Listen, Obergefell was decided June 28th, 2015, the same-sex marriage case. 3 years, 2 months, 3 months, and 8 days ago, or 10 days ago. I said at the time, where is this going to lead? What's going to happen? Well, what has happened? The floodgates on this transgender thing have just sprung open, which is kind of an interesting thing. And I'll give credit to Dennis Prager University. I'm sort of in the same category. A lot of my videos have been restricted by YouTube, I guess because the content is not politically correct. Prager University, he has of YouTube videos about the Civil War that have been put in restricted mode, like their ISIS beheading videos or Lady Gaga music videos. Some of those are also restricted because they're borderline pornography. And Dennis says this about the transgender thing. We say that sexual orientation, you're born with it and it can't be changed. And you see laws. California is trying to pass laws that say that you can't try to change someone who claims they're homosexual to be heterosexual. You can't put them through therapy. It's banned there. They've tried to ban the therapy that does that. But if you're born a male or female, you can change that. So sexual orientation is fixed, but biological sex, gender is not. It's a level of insanity. And so a lot of times I've said, we talk about, Jesus said, like it would be in the days of Lot. I'm sitting there thinking, like, I don't think Lot had to put up with this nonsense. And it also says in Peter, by the way, in 2 Peter 2, that Lot saw this and he felt oppressed by all the licentious bad behavior going on around him. And so my point here, I'm going to try to hit you with my hand here on the
Yeah, you go right ahead.
But it said he was grieved by what's going on around him. And so I would say, as Christians, if it doesn't bother you, then you need to do a heart check on your status with the Lord. If it does bother you, that's actually a good sign. And I'm just telling you, Chad, is I read a lot of newspapers from all over the world. I have subscriptions to some services. I have access to 6,000 newspapers a day. Now, I don't read all those, but I read a lot of them. I read a sampling of them. I read through reports, French government reports using Google Translate and that type of thing. And I just have to tell you that I feel like the world's gone mad. Now, I still get up and go to work every day and that type of thing. I'm still living in the world. I personally think it's sort of part of the end time thing that we talk about a lot. Is I think God's allowing some of this stuff to kind of help us shift our priorities to the right thing. He's decoupling us from a love of the world, because we look at it and we think, I don't really want any part of that. And maybe that's the attitude we really should have. Now, I think we should try to make a better world and that type of thing. But we know these days that Paul talks about are coming. This is sort of his thing about secular society. And you look over in other passages and he's talking about what's going on in the church. And the church is, I think, sort of, I don't know how else to say it, kind of falling apart.
Well, I quoted you actually, John, in my book. You talked about the mainline churches, what used to be the mainline churches. We're talking about Harvard, Stanford, or any of those. What people my generation and thereafter don't remember or realize that these were established first as Christian seminary schools.
That's right. Princeton as well.
Princeton, they were all Christian. They were chartered to teach ministers. And you look at where they are. You talked about the main line and then the evangelical line. You compared them to Oholah and Oholibah in the scriptures.
Chapter 23.
Right. And so you've talked about this too. And I mean, this is why it's so tough to talk to you, John. Man, I just get to, like you said, they're talking about a negative nanny, but I think the problem is the part of the reason it is allowed to have gone this way is because folks like you and I have that feeling of disgust about it. And so the reaction is, what are the past and people before us, the reaction is to not want to listen to it. They ignore it. And it's like finding out that you have an infection and saying, maybe if I just don't think about it, it'll go away. And all of that's done is provided the environment and for it to grow and become this monstrous thing. And you're right. I mean, the only people you can blame are those who had the power to do anything to stop it. and to fight against this.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is, I think, God said that this is the way the world would be before Jesus returned. So um, there were a lot of people doing the devil's bidding, I guess, over this time that allowed this to get to this condition. And part of it was, I think, we're sort of like the frog in the kettle. We didn't really realize it was boiling until it's kind of too late. Now, I don't think that people should withdraw. I think that you should still fight it as much as you can. And look, if you've got kids or grandkids, you got to protect them. But I'm just telling you that I I saw it going on in the university in the 70s, 40 years ago, and I know it's worse now. Now there are pockets of good things that are happening and people that are resisting it. I'm just saying is that the example I've used, and I've used it in some of my videos. Uh, Boxing Day 2004 in the Indian Ocean, a massive earthquake occurs in Indonesia, and there's a tsunami. And I have the video of it. I've used it in a number of my videos because I think it's a picture of the end times. Across the ocean in Thailand, at I think it's called Phuket, a resort area, people were going out to take boat rides. But what happened was all the water drained out of the bay. And so all of a sudden, these boats are sitting there in the bay, high and dry. The coral reefs are exposed. So people started walking out into the bay. They're looking at everything. Oh, look at that pretty coral reef over there. Boy, usually you have to come out here in a boat and snorkel to see that. And then all of a sudden in the video, you see people, the guy kind of goes from the bay to the horizon, and all the way along the horizon is this giant whitecap wave. And they're like, what is that? And somebody goes, maybe the earthquake caused this. Nah, the earthquake couldn't have caused this, the water to drain out of the bay. Well, what's that whitecap? Then somebody says it's a tsunami, and people are going, no, that's not a tsunami. And then all of a sudden they realize tsunami. And you see the locals who know, they start running for the hills, and all these crazy tourists are just out there, and you see the water come and sweep over them, and you know that they're dead. And so that's a picture of the end times, is that there's this tsunami of all this stuff that builds. And at times it looks like it's okay, but the tsunami's coming. The tsunami of God's judgment is coming, and we just have to realize, and it's not a very popular message. It's like oh, you're just a Jeremiah. Okay, I am. And Jeremiah was right.
Yeah, so that leads to this next question, and this is probably one that will get me in trouble or get me a lot of rage and emails and stuff too. Is Trump preventing or perpetuating the tsunami?
Oh boy, that's
I told you.
I think my internet's going out. Look, there's a lot of stuff that he's done that I've liked. I'm sort of, maybe it's because I'm a lawyer, I'm cynical. To me, the jury's out on which way this is going to go. I mean, look, today, the news, everybody's like, oh, he's going to get rid of Rosenstein. He's going to get rid of Rosenstein. And then I just read a news article before I came down here that Trump said, I have no intention to fire Rod Rosenstein. So is he changing things? There's a lot of theories out there. Look, there's this one theory. I've spoken against this. I've gotten hate mail about it. And prove me wrong, okay? The 52,000 sealed indictments that exist. I've drilled into that data. They've given you lists of the cases, the case numbers. I've looked at 300 of those cases and when I looked at the list, it was like 15,000. Only one or two of them were even criminal indictments out of the 300 that I looked at, and they really weren't that related. They really weren't that related to anything that everybody says Trump has taken down the deep state and all this other stuff. I know how indictments work, and to get an indictment, you have to go to a grand jury. To go to a grand jury, you get 23 people together, and what happens when you get caught up in these investigations is everybody lawyers up. Everybody lawyers up. Lawyers talk to other lawyers. I can tell you there is absolutely no buzz in the legal community about massive numbers of indictments, which will require massive numbers of grand jury decisions. I mean, we're talking like that number grows by 150 a day. It's just not a real number. And so look, I want bad people to go to jail. I want them to be arrested. I know that there's this concern of pedophilia. And I think it's a massive problem. I've dealt with this in my role as an elder and a pastor. It's a real problem. I know so many women who were sexually abused as young people. Those are very, very difficult cases to prosecute. There was this task force, you mentioned it. I think there were about 2,000 people arrested across the country in one of the big sweeps. That task force worked on this for 10 years to get to that number. It was a joint task force of federal, local, state state agencies that investigated. I know policemen that work in human trafficking. You can go up the road to Toledo, Ohio, where my law firm's home office is, and that is one of the epicenters of human trafficking here in the United States. These are very difficult cases to prosecute because it's hard to find a victim. It's hard to find someone that can testify. So, while I hope that it will change. I hope things will be done. I'm very skeptical of the claims that I've seen made about 52,000 indictments and everything is going to happen. And now that Kavanaugh has been appointed, everybody in the deep state is going to be arrested. I hope I'm wrong. Okay. If I'm wrong, you can send me emails.
Send them to your pastor at FBC Chapel.
Yeah, Pastor Steve at fbchapel.com.
That email. So that rolls into the next question I told you I was going to bring up. What do we see on the docket? Did you have a chance to look at that for the Supreme Court in the upcoming year? Is there anything of significance?
I don't think that there's anything that's significant right now. But cases are working their way through. When you get a case, I've taken a couple of appeals to the United States Supreme Court. What you have to do is you file a thing called a petition for writ of certiorari. You ask the Supreme Court to review your case. The Supreme Court has thousands and thousands of those things filed every year. Appeals from, for the most part, from the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals. Kavenaugh was on the D.C. Circuit. Because the federal agencies in D.C., the D.C. Circuit is probably the most active circuit. The Ninth Circuit out in California in the West is probably the crazy circuit because
there's thousands of empty benches as well in the federal judges.
I don't know how many that empty there are, but Trump has appointed hundreds of judges in the.
Yeah, I saw that number. I think 3 years ago. At how many vacancies there were for federal judges, and I was like, how could that be? But
it's true, and it's hard to find people to serve, and it's become a political football. I mean, it used to be. Look at what happened with Ginsburg. Ginsburg was a leftist ACLU pro-abortion attorney. I mean, she's as left as they come. I think the vote to approve her was like 98-2 or something like that. Scalia, who's conservative jurist, he was approved, I think, 99-0. Nobody opposed him in the Senate. Those days are long gone. And now you see what, especially with the left, this does not happen on the Republican side. They don't play by the same rules. You saw this with Kavenaugh, the politics of personal destruction. They didn't care about Kavanaugh. They didn't care about his daughters. They didn't care about his wife. They cared about playing power politics. And you saw one of the ugliest series of things that I've ever seen in the United States Senate. I mean, you see, people were chasing down Mitch McConnell in airports. They were attacking Ted Cruz in a restaurant. I'm telling you, I'm concerned at the direction that we're going. I heard Joel Richardson. I've heard Dennis Prager, other people that we're in the midst of a cold civil war right now. It's just no shooting has started, and
Yeah,
I'm concerned the way it's going. I mean, we may be past the tipping point.
yeah. So what you did mention to me a small fact that hasn't made much media about that. We were talking about the docket for the upcoming year,
Yeah.
but you mentioned something to me that I didn't know, and that was about the clerks. Go ahead and tell us about that.
Yeah, so each Supreme Court justice has, I'm not sure, maybe the Chief Justice might have more because he has more responsibilities. They currently have 4 law clerks. Every federal judge has 1 or 2 law clerks. Like they have the district court, you have the Court of Appeals, and then you have the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court only hears 150 to 180 cases a year. But they each have 4 because their cases are important and they set a lot of precedent. They have 4 clerks. Kavenaugh announced his 4 clerks over the weekend. He is the first Supreme Court justice in the history of the United States that every one of his law clerks is a female. In drilling through the data that people were able to come up with from his time, the 13 years he spent on the Circuit Court of Appeals in the District of Columbia, he hired a higher percentage of female law clerks than any federal judge in the history of the United States.
You see, that's pretty big. You would think, especially when you're talking about a liberal agenda and women's rights and everything. Here you got a judge just appointed this week, confirmed, and he's already staffed. I mean, he's got right to work, and he staffs the highest number in the history of the Supreme Court clerks, high level positions.
Well, let's put it this way: the only one ever to have all of his clerks filled by female at the same time.
And it's not made a blip. It's not even made a tiny blip. I don't even know where you found that news. I mean, somebody probably buried it in a corner of a Washington Post on like page 7 or something. I mean,
I'm pretty sure, it was funny. I looked at the front pages of the newspapers yesterday, and a few of them had, a big picture of Kavanaugh being sworn in Saturday night by Chief Justice Roberts at the Supreme Court.
Right.
While there were all these crazy, did you see these people? They break
through
the barricades. They're pounding and scratching at the door. It's almost like the people scratching and pounding at the door of the Ark when the flood came.
Right.
That's what I was kind of thinking of when I saw it happen. But the New York Times had no picture of him being sworn in anywhere in the paper on Sunday. The Washington Post had a little picture on the front page. You go out to San Francisco, they had a little tiny blurb in the corner of the front page that said Kavenaugh confirmed. See inside the newspaper. So even my Columbus Dispatch, it had no picture. It had a front page that said Kavenaugh confirmed. They had a big headline, but no picture. They had a picture of a guy who's setting up a cannabis store in Columbus. That was the big picture on the front page of the Dispatch yesterday morning. So I'm just telling you I'm a realist. I still go to work every day. I live in a nice place. I have a pretty good life, but I have a very close friend. He has a very close friend who's a pretty high powered, politically connected lawyer. And he said, look, and I don't think this guy's a Christian either, by the way, but he just said, if the Republicans lose in these midterm elections coming up in 4 weeks, the United States is over. Now, this is somebody who's very politically connected. He's not a guy who watches John Haller's prophecy update or anything like this. So he's not getting it from me. There is just a massive amount of things going on here in the United States, in our culture, in our government, and the left, and I would say the left is unhinged.
We're about an hour. I told you, John, that I would try to,
Let's just
be.
we'll go as we can go for a while. So
Okay. Well, I just wanted. So, I mean, we've talked about here locally and everything, but I know because I listen to your updates as much as I can. I don't always get to listen to the whole thing because of my job, but I try to listen as much as possible. Thinking back in the last,
forgive you if you don't listen to every one of them.
well, I try to make. I mean, you're a good friend, so I mean, I like to
that's
keep
okay.
up with my friends are doing and what's on their minds because
It often
we have to have we have to
funny.
have people we can trust
Right.
and
It's funny because sometimes I'll run into somebody and they say, you should have talked about this in one of your updates, and I'm like, well, I really did. 2 weeks ago, I talked about that, so I know you didn't
So-
watch, but I forget what I'm ready for that. So.
yeah, I send you stuff from time to time. I try to, but so what has really caught your attention, perhaps maybe in the last month that we haven't touched on here tonight, and we can talk about that a little bit.
Well, I get a lot of information from a lot of different sources, and so I'm, my question. Look, I'm an American. I like America. It's been a good place to grow up. I feel like I'm pretty free, but I see the encroachment on freedom of speech everywhere, and it appears that what the government has been able to do has been to sort of outsource control of speech to big tech companies like Google and Facebook and other companies such as that. I mean, and then the EU has put in place rules and regulations over the last couple of years that really require the tech companies to act as censors. They're very active because the Chinese economy is growing. They're very active in China. Google is coming out with a search engine that is been adapted for Chinese government, whatever the Chinese government wishes. I see people.
Well, I can speak to a little bit about that. They've gone to this rating system. I actually saw an article about this 2 days ago. They've gone to a social rating system so that socially those around you can rate you, and it actually begins. There was this guy who was he was an independent reporter, and he is now, because of his social credit rating in China, he can't ride on a train. He can't get a passport. He can't leave the country. He can't ride on buses, public transport. This man is literally restricted to his own home or walking distance, what he can walk, because of his social credit rating.
Right. Yeah, that video was done by the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. I can't remember the name of it. I did reference it in my update a week ago. And remember that show Person of Interest that they always had the people being tracked by cameras and stuff.
Right, but there was an episode on Netflix that was exactly this. I mean, it was exactly this, called Black Mirror. I don't know if you have Netflix or have seen it, but
I haven't seen
it. But there's one on Netflix called Black Mirror, where it was about this social credit rating and what a dystopian nightmare it was for people, and yet it's the reality.
Yeah, China
for billions.
China has like 300 million cameras, public cameras in place to monitor people, and they want to increase that by 450 million in a very short time frame. And look, cameras don't cost much now; they're high definition, and they're tracking people, and the tech companies are going along with it. So what happens is the restrictions that China or Europe place on the internet and that type of thing, Google and Facebook and everything, it's like, well, we'll just do that everywhere. And so, they've been able to if people want to control people, they've been able to outsource it to the tech companies, and the tech companies seem to go along with it. Here's a significant story, I think, that came up in the last month. Marie Le Pen. Now, look, I don't agree with Marie Le Pen. I think she probably has some extreme views that I don't really share. She's head of the Nationalist Party in France. She finished second to Macron in the election a couple of years ago. And Macron was elected like 2 years ago. It seems like it's like, what, 12?
Right.
I mean, that's the other thing I notice kind of as we get to the end times is that time gets compressed. So it's sort of like, oh man, that happened like a year ago. No, that was last week that happened. Because so much stuff happens so quickly now, and we're always aware. We all have our iPads, we all have our phones, our computers with us all the time, and we're constantly bombarded with stuff. But we're constantly bombarded with stuff because stuff is happening all the time, everywhere. So Marie Le Pen, somebody on Twitter accuses her of being like ISIS. So she goes and she posts a picture of an ISIS beheading and somebody being burned alive and run over by a truck, and says, I'm not like this. And so now Marie Le Pen, because she criticized this, that she's been ordered to undergo a psychiatric exam by the French government. And she's refusing to do it. But if she doesn't do it, she's going to be banned from running for public office. And so that's why I see these things, I see stories. There's a story running around that John McCain was arrested for treason. He was tried before a secret military tribunal and executed. I've heard people, Christian guys related to prophecy, talking about this. Now, one, I don't think there's any proof of it. And secondly, I don't know if I want to live in look, I was no fan of John McCain. I have a very close friend who was in a POW camp with John McCain, a guy who spent a lot of time with John McCain over the years. I have no love for John McCain, but I'm concerned when I see Christians saying, "Oh, it's okay that he was, tried before a secret military tribunal for treason," which nobody can ever define what his act of treason is. I'm concerned about that. We live in a time where a lot of people are talking about they want to put in martial law and that type of thing. And now I see Christians who I would think, conservative Christians who would oppose it, kind of going along with it, thinking, "Oh, well, this will be a really good thing." Well, maybe it's a good thing, but what happens when you're not in power? When you're not controlling the lever of power? Do you really want to be in that situation?
Right. Well, that just, all these things combined, and I'm like you, John. I see a nearer timeline for things being crazier, simply because of the tech that's coming out that allows the beast system to implement and actively implement with a means to control people thoughts. This one about you in our conversation earlier struck me as much as it struck you, is free, the ability to say on a public stage or in public what you believe. That is, the very basis of what a free society must have is the ability to speak out, particularly against the government. And I see that going away. As you said, it's been outsourced by the government to the institutions. I don't see how they can roll that back, because they have, it's a brilliant strategy to outsource, which is basically fascism. But any textbooks will tell you that fascism is simply the stepping stone to full-blown what we would call communism. It's the stepping stone to communism. I don't see in history where that has been stopped without a total breakdown of the society to begin with. A complete breakdown.
Yeah, and I'm concerned that we're at that point in our. Listen, I'm talking people who are not wild, crazy, fringe people. I'm talking about good thinking people. I really respect Dennis Prager. He's a conservative, Jewish talk show host. He just wrote a book on Exodus that was a New York Times. Well, it wasn't a New York Times bestseller, but it was selling way more than anything on the New York Times list.
Yeah, probably an Amazon bestseller for sure.
Oh, it was off the charts. And he was like, I wrote a book on one, he's got a 5-book set that he's working on, his commentary on the Torah. And so he writes, the first one he releases is on Exodus. And it's like nobody writes a book on a commentary on the Torah, expecting it to be a bestseller.
Right.
But he talks about the fact that he thinks we're in at least a cold civil war right now. And he's like, where's it going to go? And I've listened to this guy for years. It's one podcast I listen to every day. And I will say that I've watched him over the years, and over the last year, he's been like, you're a fool, you're an idiot, you're a moron. I mean, I've never seen him use those kind of descriptors as much as he has, because there's just nothing else that you can say about it when you see it happening.
Well, you have another phrase that you use often, and I know you know the scripture right off your heart, where the translation literally reads, "God morons the world."
Right. It's from 1 Corinthians chapter 1. The foolishness of God is the wisdom of God is foolishness to men, and God kind of gives them over. It kind of ties in with Romans chapter 1, that God gives
to a
them over.
depraved mind.
Yeah, a reprobate mind, and they lose. It literally means they lose the ability to reason. Now, does that describe our world? I mean, look, with Obergefell, the same-sex marriage decision, I'm like, this is Romans chapter 1, and where's it going to lead? Well, here we are. We're pushing transgender stuff on kids. Here's a story from a week ago. The Wichita Eagle has a giant story on page 2. Drag queens talk to standing room only crowd at Wichita Library. So they had these drag queens to come in to talk to kids at the library, and it was standing room only in the room. That's Wichita, Kansas, Chad. That's the middle of America.
That's the breadbasket. I mean, that's a breadbasket. You're talking about the southern, part of the southern. Yeah, I don't get it. So we talked about the insaneness of this Kavenaugh hearing, and we talked about a little bit. I mean, neither you or I do set timelines. Both of us have a good friend who does like timelines, a mutual friend of ours that does like timelines. So we saw the insanity surrounding the Supreme Court judge. You mentioned the elections here in a month that are coming up with those seats. But what does this foreshadow, I think, for us when it comes to the next? We got 2 years for the next presidential election.
Well,
what does this foreshadow for us?
I heard Trump talking the other day. He said he was talking about peace, Israel and the Palestinians. I want to do peace. I want to get it done I want it done before the end of my first term. He kept using the term, the end of my first term. So he's running again, and it's whatever happened in the 2016 election is going to be like on steroids coming up. I mean, Chad, I just took a quick look at Twitter today. I had a break, and I came across these guys had a video of the Antifa people directing traffic in downtown Portland, high definition video. And they were saying, oh, you're a white person. You can't go down this street. You have to go this way. And if the guy yelled at him, they chased him down the street, beating on his car. And they had like Billy Club. This is downtown Portland, Oregon. And there are cops sitting right there. I don't know. Is that going to spread to other places?
Well, I can tell you, I would not. I mean, I'm approximately 20 miles from downtown Indianapolis, and even though I was down 20 miles, which is relatively close when you're talking about cities the size of Indianapolis, that's not really far when you include the suburbs. But I had been fortunate enough that all the growth took place. I'm kind of northwest, but it was west straight and north. Yeah, straight north for the most part. Some west when you talk about the Noblesville, Carmel area, and then you got the Fishers. It all kind of went in a different direction.
Right.
But they just recently built. This is the other amazing thing. They built a whole city. basically in 2 years, complete with hospital, shopping malls, apartments, everything. In 2 years, they built this whole acreage out in 2 years.
Where
Subdivision
at?
police. It's in the Whitestown area. It's west, just south of
South of here.
Zionsville.
Yeah. Really? I had no idea.
Yeah, it's called Andis, Anderson or Addison or something like that. It's a whole city. It's whole thing. It's a district of Whitestown. There was a big fight over there. But what I'm getting at is now we, for the time last year, where I'm going with this, for the first time, my little bitty town where I live had a chase, a cop chase that took place. The guy they chased happened. It went down right down my back alley between the two houses, and we're on a back street next to us, an elementary school over here. A high school is right next to me, and this chase went down here where a cop was shot and killed. That's something that's unheard of in a town our size here. And I'm saying it's coming my way. The point I was trying to make is I wouldn't want to be anywhere near a large city, even as close as I am, during these times of peak emotional stress that triggers these leftists, such as elections and things like that. For that reason, I'm thinking now elections or appointments of Supreme Court justices or of any kind is a good time to go camping in the desert somewhere. And you know what I'm saying?
I'll often joke there's like, I wonder what the real estate prices are in Ecuador or someplace like that. And of course, then now they're overrun with refugees from Venezuela.
Well, I can tell you, I know personally of another country where I know that I could go to a place within a matter of a day. If I could get out of the country and there, I have friends in a place where I know that I would be lost and it would be very hard to find me or my family. I'm is it time to make those kind of plans? And then I'm torn, John, because I look in the scriptures and I saw that, the prophets who were called to witness in the midst of this, right? To not run, who stood up, who paid the price, who gave their testimony. And I see the reward for them in the scripture. And I'm torn. I really am. And I think anybody else who has a family, it's like I see what's coming and what, I got a wife and kids. Thankfully, they're not so young anymore. It would be difficult for me to travel. But the scary thing is that there are a lot of people like us who are actively having to think about those things. Just as you said earlier in tonight's program, they're now actually thinking about that. I think if you think about the insanity in this country, that you actually have those thoughts today is telling.
Yeah, I was just having a conversation with a friend, and you probably know who it is, but I won't identify him. He lives way out in the middle of the mountains of nowhere. So when we're talking on a cell phone, there's a corner. I can always tell when he gets to that corner away from his house because the cell phone service goes out. And and so sometimes he'll call me as he's leaving the house, and I know I better talk fast because I have about 15 minutes before he loses cell phone service for about 8 minutes. But I told him, I said, I kind of think that the way and maybe I'm like a negative Nelly. Good things happen? I think so. But I know there's a overall trajectory of the prophetic timeline as to where it's going. And I know that there's this intense period of time, a intense period of great tribulation that's coming on the world. And we're seeing at least the shadows of what's going to happen then, it's sort of casting shadows back in our world right now. Those things are being put in place, the tech, the systems, all this stuff. And I said, I kind of feel like we're almost like America's almost like the people in a limo that hasn't passed inspection speeding down a hill towards a stop sign. You understand what I'm saying? I
totally get it. I
crash in New York, which is just heart wrenching. The tragedy of that, and some of the people in the car were texting. At least one of the gals was texting that she didn't feel safe. We're all going to die, and so what do you do? look, my office, I'm in a big tower in downtown Columbus. You look out my front window, I look right down on the exact dead center of the State House. So these people come through the lobby of our building, they park in our garage, they come through our lobby to go over there to their protests. And there were big protests last week about, and it's always on the lawn in front of my office. And it's hard to talk on the
You
phone.
need to get video of this sometime.
I'm 25 floors up, the you tolerate it, you learn to tolerate it. They're not over there all the time, but boy, were they over there last Friday and last
Sure.
Friday, especially. And of course, then every now and then they have the Civil War reenactment, and they shoot those cannons off, and it rattles the windows. I'm on the 24th floor, so but I see them. I've gone over there and I've walked down the street while they're over there protesting, or I've walked on that side of the street. And I'm like you said, I'm a big guy. I'm not necessarily real comfortable in a mob. I I don't know. I think everybody has to use their conscience. Look, I've known people that have left the country. I know people that left the country and they came back because they felt like
Yeah, I do
they
too.
needed to stand here and teach and preach and warn people and maybe try to right the ship of what's going on.
Well, you keep get out of my head, John. The question is it so broken that people who have a conscience and the Holy Spirit living within them in any kind of political government situation, is the system so broken and so rigged that these people, even with their best efforts, can do anything right? Or is it so beyond? Have they put so many webs in place to prevent any change from taking place other than that which destroys us? Has it gone to the point where any part of the ship, any part of the holes can be patched well enough to keep this thing afloat for much longer? Is it possible?
I mean, look, there's been some positive things that have happened in the last 2 years. Look, I don't know. I'm not really concerned.
I asked this question because I know I'm voicing the question of a lot of our listeners.
Look, I viewed Obama as a human wrecking ball. He said before the election, we're 5 days away from fundamentally transforming the United States of America, and that was, I think, he followed through on it now, and I think Trump's trying to undo some of that. I think he's had some success, but there's a lot of opposition to him in the government agencies that he runs.
My question is he undoing some of this because it's bad business? I mean, if it's not bad for business, I don't see it as a moral. I don't see it as a moral right, other than bad business. He is a businessman, is what I see it, and obviously he's morally compromised. There's no question about that. And for his past, I don't think the man will change. I mean, he's not a person who you could tell to do that. But what I am saying is I see the changes that he makes are in regards to business. It's good business, which is why a lot of people really do support him. But, there's a lot of business out there it's not ethically or moral. I think, they don't have a change. So I think, if it's going to be good for business and it may be crossing some of our ethical, moral lines, I don't think he's going to stop that kind of thing.
I think, I mean, there's people around him that I think are good influences. There are people around him that I'm not so sure they are good influences. So it's a very mixed bag right now. And, I know there's a lot of people who are optimistic. A lot of people, everything's okay, everything's going to be fine. You don't need to worry about anything. And I think back to the prophets. One would be there's in Jeremiah. Jeremiah's. I think people ought to read Jeremiah.
They have to. I absolutely agree.
I mean, I do that. I have that teaching out there on Ezekiel chapter 23, which I think it's a pretty good. It's one of my favorite teachings. I try to do it about once a year because it kind of encapsulates so much what I love about the land of Israel, the geography, the history, the archaeology, all of that with the story of Israel, the northern kingdom, the southern kingdom. It kind of wraps it up. But in Jeremiah, there was the prophet Hananiah. Hananiah came just before the destruction of Jerusalem. And he said, don't listen to Jeremiah, because it's going to be okay. And Jeremiah is like, it's not going to be okay. The Lord's told me that this judgment is coming. You need to be prepared for this. You need to watch for this. And so Jeremiah was right. There's another example of with King Ahab and the prophet Micaiah. And now I'm going to forget the name of the king. The king of the Ahab was he and his father built Samaria up in the northern kingdom. There's the capital, and
Shechem and Shechem. You're Jeroboam and Rehoboam.
Yeah. But
Talking
I'm
about
trying
that.
to remember the king at the time of anyway. This king, he wanted to inquire of the prophets, should I go into battle against Egypt or with
Mm-hmm.
Egypt?
Mm-hmm.
And he went to Ahab, the king of the southern kingdom, and he went to Ahab, and Ahab goes, well, there were 400 prophets, and they said, go ahead and do it. You'll win. It'll be a great victory. Everything will be okay. And the king goes to Ahab. He goes, is there any other prophets? He goes, yeah, there's this guy named Micaiah, but he hates me because he always gives me bad news. And so Micaiah came in.
Jehoshaphat.
Yeah, Jehoshaphat. And so he told him, he said, you're not going to do it. Well, he listened to the false prophets. He went in, and there was a chink in his armor, and he ended up dying because it's a pretty good, if Jewish stories and narratives are patterns, it's pretty much, you can guarantee that the false prophets are about 400 false prophets to one good prophet. But people want to hear, they want their ears tickled. It's a human condition. It's in the world, it's in the church. And there are warning after warning after warning after warning. Look, I hope everything is okay. I like a comfortable life. Okay. But I don't know that I'm guaranteed that. I do think that persecution is coming. I have a friend, Chad, from South Africa, and he ministers to people in the Kurdish areas of the Middle East. He will tell you stories of Muslim imams, of Yazidi women who were kidnapped, raped by ISIS, forced into marriages, who have now been free, who have come to faith in Messiah, who have gone through unspeakable horrors, Muslim imams coming to faith in Messiah. So look, there's great hope with that. And they live in the midst, and they know that when they come to faith in Messiah, they're certain of being persecuted. One of the most powerful testimonies I ever heard a number of years ago was a guy. I've seen him. He's been associated with Ravi Zacharias Ministries, and I have a video clip of him, and it challenges me and it haunts me. And he was talking about people who are going into Muslim areas, and they're saying, well, look, you can become a Christian, just be a secret Christian and still go to the mosque and everything like this. And this guy was saying, don't do that. Don't rob us of the joy of suffering for the Lord. And that's very convicting to me, because I don't know that I always have that attitude. We need to listen to the people who live under severe persecution and how they view things. They trust in the Lord way beyond anything that we've ever tried. I have a friend. I actually quoted this. I heard a story of an African pastor, and he said, listen, don't send us water trucks. Don't send us housing materials. don't send us teams of people to come build a clinic. Send us preachers of the gospel, because we are dying over here. And before we die, we need to hear the gospel. And I told that story. I mean, it choked me up. I was actually crying. And we had a pastor visiting from Malawi that day, his father and son pastors. And he came up to me after I had said this. And he goes, I was the guy who said that. And you're right. And I was right. We need preachers of the gospel. So, look, there's great hope in this whole prophetic thing. It works out in the end. But there's turbulent time coming. We're in this vortex, and things are kind of swirling around.
I think this is probably a good place to go on, because if we probably start talking about anything else, we'll be another hour. But I think this is probably a good place to go. We could talk for a while, John. I know when we sit down together at the conferences, we go all over. Be sober-minded, be vigilant, right? Our adversary goes around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. I think that sober-minded, be vigilant. We often focus on the second part of that, knowing that for whatever reason, it says be sober-minded and be vigilant. That's today. I think so many, like you said, we've been guilty of being caught up with, and I hate to say it, baseball games for our kids, Friday night football games with our kids, 4-H projects that are going on.
Mm-hmm.
All of them in and of themselves are not evil things. That's not, so I don't want people to get me wrong. But the problem is that they have become our whole lives, when those things ought to have occupied such a small portion of our lives. The everyday fight, we ought to be realized we're in the midst of a war, whether we've wanted to be that or not. And every day there are people who are working very hard to bring about a system that is going to do these things to people like you and me. I mean, let's make no bones about it. They want us dead today. We see that. They literally do want people who believe as we believe, because there are a lot of us who are a lot worse than Kavenaugh out there, right?
Right.
Social life. And if they want him dead, what do they want to do to folks like you and I if they could get their hands on us and nobody was going to stop them? Because that's what they're voicing now. Their capabilities is their capability of doing something that carrying out. You got to ask yourself, are they capable of actually carrying out and following through on that? Maybe 5 years ago, I'd say, it would take a whole bunch of them together to have that kind of boldness. But I'm saying today, yeah, it's very, very likely. It's very realistic. And I find it very hard to be wrapped up in baseball games, 4-H projects, and football games today, because of the situation we found ourselves in. We need to be. You're going to do one of two things. You're going to increasingly become quiet, and your friends that you find yourself comfortable speaking around is going to grow less and less till you aren't talking to anybody. Mm-hmm. Or you're going to do what I have chosen to do, what John has chosen to do, and you're going to become that much more vocal, that much more bold in whatever social setting you're finding yourself in. We need to be more bold about when we hear this rhetoric going on, to call these people out and preach the truth. Say, look, I understand your emotion. I understand the way you're feeling about this, but the scripture says this is absolutely wrong. This is not right. There is judgment coming for us. We need to be those people, John. Mm-hmm. I have found myself, I'm guilty of that, being quiet when I shouldn't have had, in situations where I was outnumbered. I don't think we can be, I don't think we can afford to be quiet anymore in those kind of settings.
Right. And I do think we need to be more oriented to the scripture. And I think the Old Testament, look, in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, Paul mentions a number of times that the things that happened to Israel happened as examples for us, so that we wouldn't do the stupid.
That's in Hebrews.
Yeah, it's also in Hebrews. And so these happen for examples. And so we should look at these, unlike what Andy Stanley says, we shouldn't unhitch from the Old Testament. We should actually dig into the Old Testament and learn from that. And one of the things that you'll learn too, like in Daniel, I think it's Daniel chapter 10, Daniel's praying, he's fasting, he feels like he's under spiritual oppression. And this goes on for 3 weeks. And finally, the angel comes to him and says, I've been trying to get here for 3 weeks, but I've been engaged in battle with the Prince of Persia. And we know that the one thing to keep in mind too is that we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. And so what goes on in the heavenlies manifests itself on the earth. And so I personally believe war is ramping up in the heavenlies, and we're seeing manifestations of it break out here physically on the earth.
I agree with you 100%.
Only explanation that I can give, because it just doesn't it seems irrational. It doesn't make any sense. But if you look at the scripture says, well, listen, this is what's going to happen. So when you see it happen, you got to have hope. And ultimately, we have to decide. My friend who ministers over in the Kurdish areas has had a big impact on me, and the way I look at these things, and the things that he's done, and the way the people that he tells me about, and how they react. And ultimately, the scripture says, don't fear the one who can kill your body, but fear the one who can kill both body and soul. So as one of Pastor Mike Clapham at our church, one of his lines, he said a number of times, don't fear the devil. The worst he can do is kill you, and you win. So I don't, just in closing, I'll admit, I don't know what to do. I mean, I feel like I have a ministry here. I think some people will be led to go someplace else. But we didn't bring anything into the world. We're not taking anything out of us. The only thing that'll last is what we've done for the Lord. And I think God's kind of trying to orient us to that place. And
I would agree. I think that's
I know I sound negative, I guess, for some people.
Well, no, I think you're right. I think, that's what the show is going to be encapsulated tonight. If there's anything that encapsulates what we've talked about from start to finish, is make a decision. We're talking about decisions being made from start to finish. And I think that sums up tonight's show, is make a decision. You're not allowed to not make that decision anymore. John and I would agree. This is what the Father is doing in his body right now, is that he is causing us to make a decision. If you don't realize that for yourself, maybe that should be a check to you. If you don't see that you're being forced to make decisions in your faith, and how serious you've taken your walk with the Father, whether it's just been a friend along for a ride on a stroll through the park, or whether you see this as on a walk through a war field, your view of where you are in your faith right now is pretty telling to those of us who see what's going on. Folks, if you have never caught John Holler's weekly prophecy update, there's links in the video below. You can find his YouTube channel. They're also on Facebook. He's a trusted friend of mine. I've known him now for a few years. Very solid in the scriptures. Maybe you don't agree with everything he has to say theologically, but he loves the Father. He gets very passionate on his videos, and he's talked about weeping. You guys have seen me cry on this show. Yeah, there's been a couple times where John is touched by the scriptures, and he doesn't hide it. But go find his weekly prophecy updates. If you're like me, you have a hard time stomaching through a lot of articles. John will break down the ones that you need to see and you need to be aware of. So I recommend they're only about an hour. Check him out every Sunday, FBC Chapel. John, brother, good to see you as always, man. We're going to get to hang out, I know, at least a couple times next year in person, if should the Lord tarry. So I'm looking forward to seeing you at those. And we'll have you on the show again here next time. Okay. Thanks for coming on, buddy.
I'd love to come back on and talk about some of the stuff. We went to Israel last year, saw some great sights, and
that'll be a good show. I think that
it's had a huge impact on every trip I go over there. It has a huge impact on me. This one, even
what I think I'll do is I'll bring you and Doug Krieger on together at the same time, and maybe Doug Hamp. I'll bring you guys all on the same time, and you guys can just talk about all the stuff that you've seen over there and the stories and how they relate to the scriptures, because those are really cool. Get your slides ready. I know you had a presentation with all your slides, so get some of those ready. John, thanks for being here. Love you, brother, and we'll have you on again. Everybody, this has been Disputed Lands, Monday night, NYSTV. Till we see you next time. Shalom. John, we always give a high five here. Okay. Get that big Paul up over there. High five. Till we see you next time.
Okay, see you later.
Get right, get insight, get hungry, word of God appetite. Everlasting water, never again thirsty. To disputed lands, take a journey. Observe, interpret, and apply. Detoxify from demon doctrines, get edified. Fight the good fight, stop getting lied to. The kingdom of heaven is inside you.
Holy Spirit guide you.
Mortify your flesh by the scripture magnified. Applied what's amplified, dead corpse gets electrified. Dry bones get flesh, yelling the battle cry. To die is gain, to live is Christ. Oh yeah, you know that's right. We in this together, grab somebody's hand and hold tight. Study God's word until the world blurs. Fight evil with God's word as the world burns. Holding steadfast as it all crashes and burns. Cause whom devils disturbed are preserved by God's word. That's word. Get right, get insight, get hungry, word of God appetite. Everlasting water, never again thirsty. To disputed lands, take a journey. Get right, get inside, get hungry, word of God appetite. Everlasting water, never again thirsty. To disputed lands, take a journey. Get right, get inside, get hungry, word of God appetite. Everlasting